I would like to welcome all the participants in our very important symposium that we have entitled Bratislava, город, Mira in Russian, Bratislava, главное место мира in Slovakian, and Bratislava, the capital of peace in English. And we have in our agenda discussion panels. The War of the West with Russia. Challenges, forecasts, assessments. In search of peace and stability in the greater Middle East. Anti-Russian sanctions, legality and consequences. And tomorrow, we are going to run a discussion of a book, Financial and Economic Interests in the Ukrainian Conflict, whose stakes have played out. The presentation will be of the book Ukrainian Roulette, who wins and who loses from the prolongation of the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This book has been written by Mr. Gasumyanov, who's our partner, and we'll have the honor of introducing him. I would like to note that we have this book in an electronic format on flash drives, so each of you can get a copy of this book on a flash drive. We also have the book in the original form, in printed form.
Представить наших важных гостей. Я хотел попросить высокопреосвященный.
Before we introduce our guests, I will ask Dr. Sugdeo, representing the Oxford Center of Religions in the UK, to bless our symposium.
Are you ready, Father Patrick, to bless our symposium, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellencies, I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I will be with you throughout the meetings by video link. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, let us pray. Lord of heaven and earth, creator of all that is seen and unseen, you hold the nations in your hands. Their leaders reign under your sovereign rule. Lead us, your children, as we seek to walk in the pathways of peace, that we may follow in the footsteps of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Saviour, the Prince of Peace. Grant to us wisdom, discernment, and courage in our discussions and decisions. Bless this gathering with your divine presence, that we may know the guidance of your Holy Spirit and your will for the way forward in this our troubled continent and our conflict-ridden world. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much, Father. Bless you and bless God you and bless God us. Thank you very much. Уважаемые дамы и господа.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Я позволяю сейчас открыть симпозиум с моей короткой речью.
I would like to open the symposium with a short speech. There was an uprising in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan in 2021, and there was a major speech which I made there in Astana at the symposium. And there were a couple of points from that. speech, everyone is asking when the Third World War will start. I have one answer to that. The Third World War started a long time ago in different forms. It continues in the economic information hacker in other forms. Another question, when will the warm phase of the war start? I said that the warm phase can unfortunately start in the near future, in the near years. The third question was, is nuclear war possible? And my answer was, well, maybe not for a long time, but unfortunately, its time will come if emotions will overcome and will precede reason. Now I can clearly announce that if we are not to fight for the stopping of the second warm phase of the war, which is developing in Europe, nuclear war can begin in the near future. The West said that the rules that it defined have to be adhered to by all states, and that's the guarantee of peace. Yes, the world developed according to these rules over the last 70 years. Now these rules are suspended. They don't work. And the requirement that the world develops according to international law are becoming more relevant. That's what today's political infighting is leading to, and that is coupled with strong turbulence in international politics. There are several platforms for discussing and creating the peaceful agreement. The Helsinki in Finland, Geneva, Switzerland, and Vienna, Austria, all of these three platforms, unfortunately, have lost their neutrality. And Europe and world require a new platform, a platform that has to be neutral. And on this platform, what we need to discuss are new conditions for peace and for preparing and drafting a new peace agreement on the basis of international law. In February of this year, we suggested a new, and in fact, in reality, an old platform, Bratislava, which means old platform. 70 or 80 years ago, Bratislava had this symbolic name. Bratislava, the city of world, was a symbolic name. And so today we are suggesting that we restore this title of Bratislava and announce that Bratislava is the city, the capital of the world. Bratislava is the capital of the peace. And we will try to discuss at this symposium ways that could lead to making sure that Bratislava becomes a place for discussing and preparing peace agreements and a new international, very important international platform where peace agreements could be signed. And we'll try to discuss at this symposium ways that could make sure that Bratislava could become a place where discussions of peace agreements could be had, so that peace agreements could be signed here. That's where these signings will occur. And this is what our discussions over the next 2 days will be focused on. And we will hope that decisions will be made to lead up to such peace agreements. We will ensure that draft agreements will be prepared and that we could organize the signing of these agreements by September in Bratislava. Yes, I indeed see the possibility that in September, not later than September, a peace agreement could be signed between the West and Russia. If we are to monitor the situation between the two symposium, how we developed, Russia has gotten very close to getting ready to sign this agreement to such a degree that the President Putin recently suggested very clear proposals for a draft peace agreement. Of course, the initial discussions will not be easy, will not be smooth, but we need to create a neutral platform. That's what we did. We created good conditions for the work in Bratislava. The beginning was tough, but over a short period of time, many came to the decision that time has come to discuss the draft peace agreement. At present, the leadership of the Slovak Republic has been creating all possible real conditions to ensure that the country could become a bridge between the East European Slavic states and Russia. That said, some countries from the Central Europe will be ready to join this association, not just Hungary, but Austria and Switzerland. This union of Slavic states and Central Europe state could become a bridge between the West and Russia. That could become a catalyst for coming to the understanding of the principles of joint development. I can see this very realistically when I hear Prime Minister of Slovakia, Mr. Robert Fico talk, when I listen to Petra Pellegrini, the newly elected president of Slovakia, and I hear this during our discussion during the Vienna Club. We are especially happy to hear what Mr. Lubos Blagi is saying and all of our other partners. I'm really hopeful that all European countries and states understand that that Slovakia is ready to assume and ready to discuss it. And at the end of our symposium, we'll be ready to discuss all of these matters that are standing before us, and we'll be working on the preparation of these agreements between the European partners and Russia. And I hope that this signing will become the basis upon which a third symposium will be prepared with the participation of the heads of some European countries and Russia. And during that, we'll be prepared to fulfill our obligations that I've spoken above. And thank you for your attention. And now, I'm happy to give the floor for opening remarks to a very important guest of ours and our partner, member of the European Parliament for Slovakia, a permanent member, president of the party of Republika, Mr. Milan Uhrik. Thank you. Please allow me. I'll be speaking in English because I understand Russian quite well, but I hadn't used Russian in nearly 20 years.
Let me thank you for the invitation. Let me thank you for the possibility of being here. But first of all, let me thank you, all of you, for organizing this symposium, because I understand how much courage does it take to organize such a thing. How much courage does it take to speak loudly about peace, to even say the word peace publicly and bring it to the table. I know that it requires a lot of courage, but anyway, we cannot be afraid to use the word peace, and we cannot retreat against those politicians who are obsessed by conflict, obsessed by war, who are obsessed by this conflict-based approach, which brings conflict to every single aspect of our life. For example, we see conflicts everywhere. We see conflicts among states in the world. We see military conflict in Ukraine. We see conflicts among our citizens, and we see how people in Slovakia are shooting at each other just because of political opinions. And this is something which has to be stopped. This is something which cannot simply continue. So I'm very glad that this symposium took place, that I can be here. And once again, I'm very thankful that the word peace is being said loudly, not only in context of Ukraine, military conflict on Ukraine, but also in context of our society, of our lives, because we need peace, not only in Ukraine, but also in our countries, in our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Спасибо огромное.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Uhrik. And now, I would like to say a few opening remarks to a very important person, the Baroness Cox of Queensberry, member and former Vice Speaker of the British House of Lords in the UK, sociologist, and a renowned human rights defender. Lady Cox, please, the floor is yours.
Большое спасибо, and thank you for the great
Thank you very
privilege
much.
of participating in your very important symposium. You asked me to make some opening remarks, so I would just like to say, dear ladies and gentlemen, that I'm very glad that I have the honor to welcome you all and new members of the Club of Vienna, CANAP, for the second time this year at our symposium. This time it is dedicated to the peace in Europe and indeed the whole world. I would like to point out that the endless effort you put into organizing peace treaties between the West and Russia, and also the large amount of work aimed for establishing peace in the South Caucasus, a special concern for peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, is absolutely invaluable. Most of you know, or many of you know, that I've been dealing with the problems of the South Caucasus for a very long time, especially for the Nagorno-Karabakh region and the war which waged there between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I'll be very grateful to God if some solution is found that will be pleasant and acceptable for both sides. As for Europe, I believe that our mutual efforts will bring us the opportunity to sign a peace treaty in Bratislava in a short period of time, and thus help to bring peace to Europe for a long time. I would like to welcome some of the important representatives of the Slovak government. Please forgive me if my pronunciation is sometimes a little wrong, but specifically, I would appreciate the efforts and the work of the Deputy Chairman of the Slovak government, Mr. Luboš Behar. I also welcome the newly elected member of the European Parliament, Mr. Milan Hurek, and the Slovak Prime Minister, Mr. Robert Fico, who is doing a great deal to make Slovakia a strong and independent state of Europe. And finally, please allow me to welcome the newly elected President of Slovakia, Mr. Peter Pellegrini. I strongly believe that these politicians will be very helpful for maintaining peace in Europe. And I'd just like to express my belief that this symposium in Bratislava, the capital of peace, will be a safe place where new peace treaties will be signed. As for my own point of view and my own group and party and country, we will do everything possible to make the ideas of the symposium, with a wonderful name, Bratislava, the capital of peace, successful and achieve important results. I wish everyone involved great success, and I believe in our cooperation. So thank you very much indeed for this very significant symposium and for allowing me to say a few words to open it. Thank you so much. Большое спасибо.
Thank you so much, Lady Cox. It was wonderful to hear you. And thank you for your good words about Slovak Prime Minister, President, my good friend Luboš Blaha, and Mr. Uhrik. Thank you very much. Я сейчас сперва хочу приветствовать нашего...
First of all, I would like to welcome a very important guest of ours, Vice President of the Slovakian Parliament, member of the European Parliament, Mr. Lubos Blaha, and I would like to ask my partner, with whom we have been having this symposium for the second time, Mr. Gasumyanov, director of the National Institute for Research and Development of Communication, Russia. Mr. Gasumyanov, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy on behalf of our National Research Institute for the Development of Communications and on my personal behalf to welcome all of the participants of the second symposium, Bratislava, the City of Peace. I would like to say from the very beginning that we fully support those points that were made by Mr. Grigoryan in his opening remarks. It seems to me that the topic of Bratislava as the bridge of peace, as the center of making peaceful decisions, is very elegant. It's very timely, and we welcome that wholeheartedly. I would like to say that the topic of our today's symposium is very relevant, and I'll risk repeating myself, but I will say that the world is at the brink of a hostility. All countries are trying to find the formula of peace, but to create a formula that everyone would agree to is hard to do. We haven't been able to do that so far. A recent Birkenstock conference in Switzerland did not give a diplomatic victory to its initiators. It showed once again how you can manipulate international community. And it showed once again that without Russia's participation, it is impossible to solve these international problems. Let me mention what the president of Switzerland, Amherd, said. A peaceful process without Russia is unthinkable. I will remind that before the meeting on the 14th of June, the president of Russia identified the conditions for holding negotiations to regulate this large-scale conflict. These conditions are the basis for another formula of peace. Dear colleagues, we have been co-organizers of the symposium for the second time, and here's why. First of all, it is very important right now to restore the experts' communication between different countries. It is important that we hear each other and listen to each other. It is important to restore trust. Secondly, as we believe we need to take practical steps to develop peace proposals under the conditions when antagonism needs to be resolved between the opposed countries. Thirdly, the more adamant the West is about its leading role in the world, the stronger the resistance of other countries against that. And the global majority is becoming more cohesive and is looking for ways to develop another world with independent, not pro-Western economic and political links. Before our eyes, we see a new world of being formed of collective leadership on the values of leadership and equity. The world that is proposed by the Ukrainian in the West is based on the principles of punishment. The historical experience shows that such peace cannot be achieved. This is a direct way to self-destruction. It is a pathway to self-destruction, not for states, but to political elites. And that is manifested by the political crisis, party crisis, the political destabilization in countries, and so on. So I would like to say the following. Let's think together, analyze the consequences, analyze historical experience, and evaluate our own resources and our ability to influence the situation. I would like to wish all of the participants of the symposium an open and well-argumented discussion. And I would like to take this opportunity and make a statement, and I hope that all of the participants of the symposium need to know about this. My deputy, professor, doctor, a very well-known scientist, Valentina Komleva, went to Bratislava to take part in today's symposium. But unfortunately, yesterday, she was detained at the checkpoint in the airport of Vienna. She was held there all night. And she's still held there at a police station, and she's not being released without explaining any reasons for that. We certainly value the politeness of the Austrian police officers. They are very polite and nice to her, but we see this indecent behavior of we know who to prevent a researcher from Moscow to take part in this conference. And we really regret this happening. But I would not want to cloud our conference with this announcement. I would like to welcome everyone once again, and I would like to wish you a very pleasant and successful conference. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gasumyanov. I'm really thankful to you for what you've said. And what you've said was an addition to what I had said earlier, and I'm really thankful to you for that.
Что весь вечер вчерашний, всю ночь мы мучились.
I would like to say that all yesterday's evening and night, we were struggling, myself and my team. The professor, doctor of science, the person was fighting for peace, Mrs. Komleva. How could one have done what the Austrian policeman did to her? Bearing in mind that we sent her all the papers. She had a 5-year-long EU visa, and they're not giving us any explanations. Unfortunately, many large-scale officials and actors in Russia are afraid of trying to go to Slovakia because they need to pass through border control in Austria. The Slovakian police would never have done that. So I extend my apologies for this happening. I'm thankful to you for mentioning this, for bringing this up. We were in doubts whether to bring it up or not. It has to be brought to our minds. And now allow me to pass the floor of welcome to Vice Speaker of Slovakian Parliament, member in the Smer party, and the newly elected or old elected member of the European Parliament, Mr. Luboš Blaha.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Grigorian, dear Excellencies, dear significant guests here in Slovakia. First of all, let me thank you, Mr. Grigorian, for organizing this wonderful event. Before we organized the event in the same building of this Hotel Carlton, and it was very successful debate, and I'm very happy that I can be a part of this organization again, because I see that in whole the Europe, whole the world, the forces of peace are on the rise, and I hope that we can, in the end, win this struggle against war, against warmongers, against Russophobia, against hatred. And this is maybe the first message which should be sent from this event, that Slovakia is a peaceful Slavic country. We are a country which wants to have a peace in the world. We want to have a peace in the Ukraine. We don't want to have a hatred against Russia, against any other nation, and this is something which should be said for our conscience. Bratislava, when I was born, it was 1979, and Bratislava was the capital of Slovak Socialist Republic. At the time, it was the city of a peace. It was a symbolic city of a peace, and I really hope and believe that it can be again the city of a peace, because, you know, after so-called Velvet Revolution in 1989, all the symbols of peace was destroyed. The main square in Bratislava was called City Square of Peace. But the New Democrats and liberals decided that peace is something as a vulgar word and it should be demolished. So now the square is renamed. And this is maybe the right time today when we can again speak of peace with a pride. And I hope that such events like today can help this change. However, it will be very hard. Probably you know that Slovakia is a very divided society. There is a part of society, especially in the big cities, and probably it is very the same in your countries. In the big cities, there is a lot of progressivism, liberalism, Russophobia, militarism, and all these values which are dictated by the collective West, I would say. And there is a countryside, so towns and the villages in the regions of Slovakia who are totally different. This countryside wants peace, wants the traditional values, wants social peace and social justice, wants solidarity in Slovak society, because Slovak society has been always very solidaristic, very mutual. The value of empty individualism is not typical for Slovak society. Rather, we were more traditional, more collectivist, I would say, more devoted to the values of help to the others. And this is something which is typical for all our history. We never started a war against other nations. We always only protected ourselves. And that's why we cannot understand why there is so much hatred against Russia today. There is so much hatred in the world. We refuse all the wars, we refuse all the imperialisms, and including the American one. We very much remember the American war in Iraq. It was an aggression we refused at the time. Mr. Fico was the prime minister and he withdrew the soldiers from Iraq. And today we are the same. I mean, the government of Robert Fico. We want to have a peace. We don't want to be just the slaves of the American army or something like a colony. And that's why, and this is very important, that's why Mr. Fico was attempted on his life. Probably you heard that Prime Minister of Slovak Republic a month ago was almost murdered by the activist of opposition. This man, his name is Juraj Cintula. He was very much brainwashed by the liberal media, by the Russophobic non-governmental organizations, by all this military atmosphere, where you cannot say that you want to have a peace in Slovakia. You cannot say that you don't want to send the weapons to Ukraine. You cannot say that you don't want to send the soldiers to Ukraine, as Mr. Macron wants. Because if you say this, and Robert Fico told this to the Slovak society, told this to European society, that he wants to have a peace and he will do everything for this, suddenly you are the monster. You are labeled the monster by all these liberal media, by all these progressive politicians, by all these celebrities, because peace is very unpopular today in Europe, probably. You cannot use this word. When you are on the European summits, this word is almost prohibited. You need to say that you want to have a war against Russia, you want to demolish Russia, you want to conquer Russia, or something like this. Very, very similar language and dictionary like it was in 30s and 40s in Germany. And you know, remember that it was the time of Nazism. That's why I really refuse it. And Mr. Prime Minister was brave enough to say this also in Paris to the eyes of Mr. Macron when he wanted to send the troops and soldiers to Ukraine. And the punishment came very soon. A few weeks after that, Mr. Fico was on our meeting of government in Handlova. It's a town in Slovakia. He wanted to give the hands to few people around, and suddenly one of these people shot him 4 times to the body, and it was only a miracle that he's still alive. It was few millimeters and he could be dead. And this is something probably which shake all the Europe for a while. Suddenly, after 4 weeks, everything is the same. The liberal media are attacking Mr. Fico again. The progressive politicians are attacking Mr. Fico again. The same Russophobia, the same warmongering. Everybody wants to forget about this assassination attempt, because, you know, Mr. Fico as a prime minister is very, very uncomfortable for warmongers, Russophobic medias, for all these Western military circles. And this is the reason why even the atmosphere again after the assassination attempt in Slovakia was very, very weird. Probably you would expect that the opposition would say that we are sorry for all this hatred we spread against Mr. Fico. Maybe you expect that all these liberal media would say we are sorry for all this hatred, which led even to this attempt of murder. But it was a few days after this assassination attempt when the media started to blame us, the closest persons and closest political comrades of Mr. Fico, that we were the reason why the atmosphere in society is so bad. And even Mr. Fico is self-responsible for his assassination attempt on his life. Such a weird interpretation is typical even today in Slovakia. And we are fighting this hypocrisy, this really Orwellian language of liberal media, that truth is false and false is truth. Peace is war and war is peace. And this is something I think is very common also in your countries. When you say normal things, normal common sense things in medias, they will tell you that you are extremist, you are désolé, you are something which should be demolished in the pluralist society. You should be maybe imprisoned or criminalized. I want to refuse it because, and before when we were here in Hotel Carlton a few months ago, I said the same. I believe in freedom. I believe in pluralism. I believe that everybody can have their own opinion. I totally respect the conservative people. I respect the liberal people. I respect socialist people. I respect all the ideologies. But in Slovakia, suddenly, probably in more European countries, you can have only one ideology: progressive liberalism, and nothing else. If you are conservative, if you are patriotic, if you are socialist, I mean, in a sense, classical sense, socialist, not the Brussels socialist, because Brussels socialists are the same like progressives. It's not the same story as we are in Slovakia. If you are patriotic socialist, as we are talking about this, you are désolé, you are extremist. That's why we need to change this. These events, these debates, this conversation like we have today can help to change the atmosphere in our countries. These warmongers and progressive liberals, they have a lot of conferences, symposiums and sessions. One of these is Globsec. Maybe you know about this. After the government of Robert Fico started to proceed in Slovakia in October 2023, we stopped to finance this NGO Globsec. They had to move to Prague, and this new Globsec session will be in Prague probably in September this year. And we would like to organize anti-Globsec, to organize many Slovak and Czech colleagues from scientific circles to discuss about the freedom of speech,
because this is the maybe the main value we need to protect today, that you can have also the different opinion. The funny thing is that after 1989, it were the liberals and the Democrats, so-called Democrats, who were saying that, oh, the bad communist regime wanted to liquidate, eliminate the pluralism, the freedom of speech, the democratic powers, and so on. And suddenly, the same people, these liberals and Democrats, are saying that we need to liquidate pluralism, we need to eliminate this freedom of speech, we need to eliminate this bad kind of democracy when even the people with different opinions. Imagine, in democracy, you can have different opinion as medias, as non-NGOs. This should be eliminated. It's really funny. It's really hypocrisy, and we are talking about the totalitarian mindset of these people. You can have the totalitarian mindset and still to be a representative of liberalism or progressivism, because these people really believe that there can be only one truth, and only the totalitarian politicians in the past was like this, believing only in the one truth. So again, we are in a very, very special atmosphere now in Slovakia. It was almost 40 years ago when in the member states of European Union, the prime minister was murdered. It was Olof Palme in Sweden. And Olof Palme, as a prime minister in Sweden, was a big fighter against the war in Vietnam, against the American imperialism. And again, Mr. Fico, after almost 40 years, as a fighter against war, against Russia, the fighter against maybe American hegemony. And again, there was the attempt on his life. There was the attempt of murder. And this is something very, very analogical, I would say, that probably in the Western world, you need to follow the American dictate or the American imperialism and American wars. Otherwise, you can be a target of the hatred, which can lead even to these assassination attempts. And this is just something terrible. I'm just trying to feel accommodated by this new situation. Even I had to have bodyguards today in Slovakia because we are now the targets, because we have the opinions which the liberal media label that we are Russian agents, we are collaborators of Putin. In media, it's very typical that they imagine that me and probably Mr. Uhrig as well is telephoning with Mr. Putin every day, and probably we have so much rubbles in our living rooms that we are swimming in these rubbles. And this is their imagination, because they cannot imagine that we can have authentically different opinion, that we really believe in peace. That I wrote maybe dozens of books, scientific books about peace, about geopolitics, about the left-wing ideology. Again, not the left-wing in the sense of Brussels, but in the sense of classical left-wing, like protecting the workers, protecting the social state, protecting the peace. But I need to be the agent of Putin. They cannot understand that it can be authentic. And I think that this middle-age mindset, that if you don't believe in the religion of progressivism and liberalism and hatred against Russia, so you need to burn on the bonfire. This is only a way how to deal with you. I think this is totalitarian. And we are the people of peace and people of freedom here today in Bratislava, in the city of peace. I don't want to reduce my speech only on Slovakia, so maybe just two final remarks on Ukraine and Russia and on the Palestine. Maybe the best symbol of new Slovak government of Mr. Robert Fico, that we really want to have a dialogue, was the meeting of Mr. Blanár, who is the Foreign Affairs Ministry, with Sergei Lavrov, who is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation. You can imagine in Slovakia and in the European circles that there was so much hatred against us because of this meeting. But this is our philosophy. how can you deal a peace with Russians if you are not going to talk with them? I'm really proud that I can discuss with the Russian politicians even today, with the politicians who are blamed as a pro-Russian. And it's a big honor for me to be here and to be here with the representatives of very significant political forces in the European Union, including former president of Moldova, Mr. Dodon, who I meet tomorrow. I'm very looking forward, because in Slovakia, for many people, you, Mr. President, was a symbol of bravery against all this, I would say, warmongering against Russia, and this is very important for our people here in Slovakia. The same is valid also for Mr. Dodik. It was a few weeks ago I met the Speaker of the Parliament of Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it was a very fruitful discussion, because I really believe that we are Slavic nations and we need to cooperate with each other. And that's why I really believe that we can have a peace with Russia. I will never feel any hatred, any negative sentiments to Russian nation. And probably the majority of Slovakia is in the same position. A Russian nation and the Soviet army liberated us in the Second World War. It's still very important for us. The same is valid in the whole of our history. It was in the 19th century when our great philosopher Ludovic Tur wrote his book about Slavic nations and Slavic brotherhood, and he was very positive about Russia and I would say the philosophy of Russia, the message of Russia to unite the Slavic world. It's still very presented in many circles in Slovak society. I'm just saying that we will never hate Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, or this Alexandrov symphony. That's why I really don't believe that the hatred can solve any of our problems in today's world. The dialogue is the only way. The normal dialogue, realism. Realism is the big, very important word we are using, because kind of ideological blindness that we cannot speak with Russians, that Putin is Hitler even, as some Western circles are trying to propagate. This leads only to this mindset of total war. And the total war has only one logical consequence, the nuclear war. Because in the end, if you want to see the Russians as a total enemy, then the only chance have to eliminate total enemy is the nuclear war. And that's why I'm very afraid. I have 3 little children. I really don't want to have nuclear war. I don't want to have the Brussels in the European Union, which will dictate to Slovakia, let's send the troops to Ukraine. Let's your children will be dying in the interest of military complex of United States. Sorry, I don't want this world like this. The same is valid to the situation in Palestine, in Gaza. We are very critical to Israel. Sorry to say it, very honest, but it's like this. It's not because we are anti-Semitic. It's not because we are anti-Israelistic, but we are just for peace. We just can't be blind when we see that the dozens of thousands of children and women are dying because of massacres of Israeli government. And when you are saying this, some liberal media is saying that you are anti-Semitic. How? My favorite thinker is Karl Marx. He was Jewish. My favorite music composer was Gustav Mahler. He was Jewish. I can't say I don't like Jews. I just don't like the wars. I just don't like the massacres. I just don't like the killings of innocent women and the children. I just don't like Bibi Netanyahu. It's not that I don't like Jews. This is again the hypocrisy of this Western dialogue and Western conversations. You cannot blame the people And you cannot make up the accusations of anti-Semitism, of Russian agents, and all these really intellectual, very, very ridiculous labels, because you want to just protect the interest of some strong states in the world. This is not very fair, and that's why we want to say that there is a lot of hypocrisy against when you are comparing the Ukraine crisis and Gaza crisis. When Russia started the conflict in Ukraine, yes, there is the interpretation that the starting point was somewhere in 2014 in Donbass, when the dozens of thousands of people were dying because of the Ukraine army. And I believe in this interpretation, but still, when you are saying that Russia is aggressor, Russia is the big monster, Russia is the total enemy, and then you are saying that, okay, but Israel can killing the children and killing the women in Gaza, and no problem. We are going to send the Israelis more and more weapons like the Americans do. This is hypocrisy. And that's why we need to refuse it. The same situation is in sport events. Russian sportsmen cannot go to this ice hockey championship, but the Israeli sportsmen can go whenever they want. The American sportsmen were able to come to all the championships in the world in the time when the America was aggressively attacking Iraq. I remember the war in Yugoslavia. Probably everybody here is remembering the bombing of Belgrade. It was a trauma for Slavic people here in Central Europe. It was probably the trauma for Russians as well, and especially for Serbs. And still, we can see that the Kosovo is recognized as a country by the majority of the member states in the European Union, with exception of few, including Slovakia. We will never respect Kosovo as a state because it was against the international law, against the will of the Serbian nation. But when we are talking about Crimea, or we are talking about Donbass now, the biggest crime in the international law, biggest crime in the history is the succession of these states. It's a hypocrisy again. It's a double standard. And that's why we need to refuse it. To say the final words, because I don't want to speak a lot, because I need to go again to the Slovak parliament. Today we have the important debate about the changing the Slovak public television. Really, really important, because till today it was really the main messenger of propaganda, liberal, progressive, warmongering propaganda of Slovak society, Slovak political forces in opposition. So to say the final words, again, big thank you to Mr. Grigorian and to the Club of Vienna for organizing this event. Feel welcome in Bratislava, in the city of peace. Please feel free to say your opinions, because till the government of Mr. Fico is in the power, you can be really free and feel free. Maybe if the progressive in some future will be in government, probably such events will be not allowed, because, you know, the free and the liberal and the democratic parties, they don't want to have such discussions, and pluralism, this is something which they refuse. And I would like to say, please remember Bratislava as a city of peace, city of freedom, city of hospitality, because Slovakia as a Slavic peaceful nation will always be like this. And hopefully the friendship and the peace values will be together in our hearts, and in your countries, in my country, we will help in the end to find a way for peace in Ukraine, to find a way to have again good, friendly relations with the Russian Federation, and to have also peace in Gaza. These are our common aims, and I hope that we will discuss it more in today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Спасибо огромное.
Thank you
Я хочу только
so much. I would like to confirm
вот эту речь,
that
которую вы слушали,
this speech that you've just listened to,
без страха.
made without fear,
Вы потом будете
objectively,
слушать выступление господина
then you would be
Блаха,
listening to
господина
Mr. Blaha's speech at the Europarlament and Mr. Uhrik's speech at Europarlament, and you would feel that these individuals speak what's on their mind and in their hearts,
Я очень благодарен.
for which I'm really thankful to them both, and I would like to thank them heartily for that. And what he said about GlobSec,
После нашего симпозиума,
after this symposium at the end of February,
я слушаю, что Глобсек отправили в Прагу.
we heard that the GlobSec was sent out to Praga. But instead of GlobSec, we have the Vienna Club. But GlobSec
Отрава для
had been poisoned for 15 years for Slovakia, because the geniuses, quote unquote, spoke here, such as Kasparov, ex-chess player, Harry Kasparov, and others. That was a catastrophe. And I'm so glad that we are rid of that. Yes, please. Thank you so much, Mr. Blaha. It may sound as sarcasm from my part, but I would like to give one more argument in your hands, knowing how seriously people hear you, how they listen to you here in Slovakia and in Europarlament. I represent Russia. I'm a Russian political scientist. My name is Gevargan, Karina Gevargan. I would like to say that Russia has such a geostrategic configuration and potential, including the resource potential and the human potential, that it can afford to be autarkic or self-sufficient. And there are very few countries like that in the world. Even to the full extent of that, I'm an Orientalist. I even assume that not even China can afford something like that, despite its size. The United States can be self-sufficient. Its geostrategic position and resources are there. But that's probably it. I don't think we will find another country like that. And the experience of the Second World War was processed in the Soviet Union very properly. And that allowed us to make conclusions and learn lessons and create the nuclear potential. And that nuclear potential and the nuclear umbrella, by some estimates made in Pentagon, among other things, exceeds in its power and the potential, the aggregate potential of the Western, the far Western countries. I'm talking about the United States in particular, the UK, and France. And in that sense, nobody should be trying to scare Russia with nuclear weapons. That doesn't make any sense. And Russia isn't just self-sufficient, but let's look truth in the eyes. It's also a very powerful, a mighty power, and it's very dangerous to poke at this power. And I'm making a conclusion. Maybe it will sound conspirological. The West, in the face of the United States and some elites of the United Kingdom, France, and perhaps that's it. These are the nuclear states, after all. They are doing everything they can to agree with Russia later on when it is weakened. And by what? That will be weakened at the expense of Central Europe, at the expense of countries like Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and others. They are not really having anything for those countries. They want to make those countries the battlefield, like they did with Ukraine. Russia will survive. That's not the question. It will not be losing there because it has the levers that it can pressure the West with. America wants to say no to Russia's highly enriched uranium for its nuclear power plants, but the question is whether the United States can afford to do that in the nearest future. Not likely in the nearest future. So the fate that has been assigned to the Central Europe in that sense, in terms of sufficiency and increasing sufficiency of the Central Europe, and you are becoming the front man for Slovakia, and the Slovakia can become the frontline country. I think it makes sense that the real common sense prevails after all. Thank you very much. Please ask your questions quickly. And yes, Mr. Ramsch, please. You have a microphone, please. Use it. It's right there. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Blaga, for your talk. We listened to you last February. Now we see you again. Thank you for giving us this, supporting this platform for an intensive dialogue, also between Europeans and Russians, but also among Europeans themselves. So my question is on Europe. How would you characterize the possibility of a change inside the ruling institutions of the EU in the coming weeks and months due to the results of the election?
Thank you very much for your question, Your Excellency. Since I was the part of these European elections and together with Mr. Uhrik from different political party, but we both are now the member of European Parliament, I can tell you that I had a big expectations in these elections, in these European elections, and I really hoped for a big radical change. Yes, in some countries, this radical change came. You can see France, where the Liberal Party of Mr. Macron as a president was so much defeated in these elections that he had to make the new government, new elections, and the party of Mrs. Le Pen is really on the rise. The same situation was in Belgium when the liberal government or neoliberal government stopped to exist after these elections, and this is a good message, I think, for all these patriotic and peaceful parties in all the countries in the European Union. But still, the majority in the European Parliament will be in the hands of these centrist parties, including the People's Party, Socialist Party, and the Liberal Party. Yes, in the end, the Liberal Party was reduced a lot. All these, the most extremist and most progressive parties, including Greens, including this Renew Europe, was reduced. But still, these centrist, I would say, centrist groups in the European Parliament can have the majority if they will have the help of the Greens fraction or of this ECR fraction. And when we see the ECR Russophobia, probably in the name of the common hatred against Russia, there will be the kind of new great coalition in the European Parliament, and they will vote for Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen and all this European Commission. So it will be the business as usual, I would say, in the end. But it would be wrong to say that nothing is changed in the European Union. I think that the technocrats in the Brussels are quite afraid of the trends in the European Union, in the member states, because the rise of this patriotic, of this conservative, of this peaceful, or all these patriotic leftist parties in these member states, they just cannot ignore it. And it is not the question of war against Russia only. It is the question of Green Deal, for example. This radical project of Green Deal, so devastating against the European economy, everybody can see now that this is unsustainable. The same for this migration politics. Everybody can see now that this welcome culture of some kind of progressive politicians in the European Union, it should be stopped, because this illegal migration is a big threat for the societies in the European Union. The same is for the issue of agriculture, when this liberalization of trade with Ukraine almost eliminated and really reduced the possibilities and chances of our Slovak and European farmers. And I can continue. So I can tell you that I am not as optimistic as I was before the elections, because really these elections could be better. The results of these elections could be better, but still I see the big chances to raise the voice in the European Parliament. I think I will be very active in this field, and probably Mr. Uhrig as well. Voice for peace, voice for common sense, voice for national sovereignty, voice for the new concept of Europe, the Europe of nations, like it was the de Gaulle's dream, not the federal Europe, but the Europe of nations, sovereign nations. And I think that we can follow this dream still, and we can be in very, very friendly manners with our neighbors, including Russia. And I really, really appreciate what you said before, because it was a few years ago when I was in Russia, in Moscow. I was in Red Square, and I made a video when I was saying that Russia is wise, Russia is brave, Russia is friendly, Russia is beautiful. Suddenly, the first message in all this liberal media was, "Oh, Russian spies saying to us, telling to us that Russia is beautiful." How can he say that? How can he say that? How can he say that Russia is wise? You know, I was saying that the Russian scientists, Russian, you know, all these results of your science, of your, I would say, space events and so on. And they want to ignore it. They just live in their propaganda that Russia is the big monster, Russia is unable or whatever. And suddenly they see that they cannot defeat Russians, and there are very big psychological problems because of this. So again, to this question and the last word, I really hope that these trends in the European Union, in the end, can lead to this more peaceful and more social Europe. But this will be the fight for decades. It cannot be resolved in a few years. And I can just promise that we, the Slovak patriots, the Slovak authentic left-wingers, I would say, authentic socialists, not the socialist of Brussels type, will always fight for peace and the national sovereignty. This is our main aim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Herr Hümmel, Sie haben Frage, oder? Ganz kurz bitte, ja? Sie haben Mikrofon, bitte sehr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blaha. In many ways, it was surprising almost to me that I could agree on everything what you described regarding your kind of traditional position and the counter reaction of the left liberals. It sounded very similar to what we experienced in June. But my question is the following, and I can follow up on this. Before the war, the Visegrad states were a very strong voice. And now, how do you see the potential if there is, let's say, a better coordination of Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia? Let's say, Poland, you know better than I, may not no longer be part of this, I call it club. But how do you see this potential?
Thank you very much for your question, because it's very important for Slovak government, and it's a big dream of Mr. Fico as a prime minister to have the Visegrad group again alive. But we are very realistic. Everybody can see that Slovakia and Hungary are pro-peace countries, and that now Czech government, right-wing government, and Polish society in overall, I would say, are very, very Russophobic. And they are, I mean, especially the Czech government is such aggressive on their rhetoric against Slovakia and Hungary that they even refused to meet with the Slovak government a few months ago. And this is the situation. So really the Visegrad group is really in danger, really in danger. I can see that there is also the opposition in Czech Republic, which is more pro-peace. We have very good cooperation with Mr. Babiš, who was the former prime minister, and probably he will be the next prime minister, hopefully.
And in this situation, probably Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary can cooperate much more. Then we can see that Austria is still neutral state. Yes, it's not, I would say, such pro-peace country like Slovakia or Hungary, but still it's neutral. Then we can see the other countries in this region, which are very important when we are going to south. Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Republika Srpska, Moldova. I can see the countries which can be very helpful. We see some traditional Russophobia in Romania. We see some traditional Russophobia in Poland. Yes, probably these countries cannot be included to these new forces of cooperation, but still we are very optimistic that the trends in Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, can be different. Yes, I can understand that in Baltic countries, probably not. I can understand that in Romania or Poland, probably not. But in Hungary, in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, in Austria, it's still possible. So I don't know what will be the future of Visegrad Group. We can cooperate in the European Union in the issues like cohesion funds, energy cooperation. Many interests are the same. But there is such emotion against Russia in the instances of Poland and now Czech government, that I'm very pessimistic that in forthcoming years the situation will be the same like it was before the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое. Я сейчас должен попросить и дать слово.
I now have to ask and give the floor to Mr. Oklik, member of European Parliament, and I would like to ask Baroness Cox to prepare for the next, and Miloda Dodik of. Thank you very much. I will also be speaking English because I've prepared my script in English so that our friends from Western countries should understand me.
Again, for the opportunities to speak on the forum as well, to have a chance to contribute to a very complex and very difficult topic. Many people have been asking questions, who wins and who loses, since the beginning of the conflict on Ukraine. This subject can be looked at from different perspectives, from military perspective, from economical perspective, a demographic perspective, as well from a geopolitical or technological perspective. And I will go very quickly through it. When you look at the economic part, according to International Monetary Fund, Ukraine lost 30 or 35% of real GDP growth in the first year of conflict, which is quite enough. And the poverty of people in Ukraine grew from 5% to 24%, according to World Bank, only in the first year, in year 2022. Damage to the infrastructure, to the ports, power plants, to the cities, also damage to the agriculture is also very significant and contributes to the economic slowdown and recession. Millions of people have fled from Ukraine already to the countries like Poland, like Slovakia, like the rest of the Europe. Not to mention many thousands of peoples which died in the zone, in the area of conflicts. The demographic issue is very serious, as we Central European countries are facing still a significant influx of Ukrainian refugees. For example, only Poland accepted already 1.2 million refugees who received already social security numbers. This is quite a mass of people. Serious questions about Ukraine can be also found in other areas. For example, who will reconstruct the destroyed regions if there is such rapid population decline? If the people are fleeing from those regions, will it be the same large multinational companies like it was in case of Iraq or Libya? Yes, it is probable, I think. And It is also interesting that representatives of European governments, and this partially includes Slovak government, are convinced that our companies will have a significant share in reconstruction. Personally, I wish for it, but I doubt it a little bit, because I think it will be the same as it was in the case of Middle East reconstruction after several wars, where 99% of those contracts for reconstruction went to the Western, mostly American companies. British newspaper The Guardian wrote a headline that top 10 hedge funds made 1.5 billion pounds profit from Ukraine war and food price spike. Hedge funds and financial speculators have made obscene profits by betting on hunger. So they know that there will be a crisis, and by betting on this crisis, they simply made billions of pounds or dollars of profit. Also, military companies of both sides certainly benefits. William Hartung, expert on global arms trade and Pentagon spendings, said, "It's a huge profit center for big companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing. At the moment, I think they are riding the wave." Goodbye, Mr. Blaha. And Mr. Biden's favorite Lieutenant General Stephen Basham as well comments, the time that is being spent by Russia inside Ukraine is also the time that we have to get our industrial base to where it needs to be. So obviously, weapon manufacturers make a fortune on arms flows to the conflict from US and Europe. We can see it also on the 60 billion package, which was approved by US government, $60 billion for Ukraine. It sounds good, but let's have a closer look at it. 20 billion out of these 60 billions are actually money for US Army to replenish their own equipment, which was formerly sent or provided to the Ukraine. 14 billions will go to US military industry to create or manufacture new weapons for Ukraine. 1/4 of the package, 15 billion, will go to US support and training of military staff and so on for Ukraine. And only 8 billion out of these 60 are direct budget support for Ukraine. It means that more than 85% of this so-called US aid for Ukraine will be actually spent within the economic area or economic environment of United States. Energy companies also have been racketing up their profits by supplying more energy to Europe as Russian gas supplies are cut off. America supplied in the year 2022 60% of Europe's LNG, while Russia, which used to supply 40 up to 50% in previous years, decreased its export of gas to EU only to 12%. At least these are the official numbers, but we all know how it works. Organizational Global Witness made analysis which shows that regardless of what's happening in the front lines, the fossil fuel companies are the main winners of the war. Energy prices are really increasing, and despite that, European governments are trying to move away from stable and cheap energies from Eastern countries to the more expensive energies from Western countries, Western sources. This is the main reason also why the super companies, multinational companies like Shell, Chevron, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Total Energies have made $28 billion since the war began. This is incredible amount of money which they are earning, profiting only because the energy crisis. But we see much more. Current government in Ukraine is still holding only thanks to the support of many Western countries. These countries provide finance for running Ukrainian state, and they legitimize current leadership of Ukraine, which mandate would be otherwise severely questioned since the election has been cancelled in Ukraine and political opposition in Ukraine has been banned, forbidden. All decisions of current government in Ukraine can be assessed within this framework. 2 months ago, I'm a member of European Parliament, and 2 months ago, European Parliament approved overall budget of 50 billion euro to the government of Ukraine. From this 50 billion injection, 33 billion shall be in form of loans, and 17 billion euros should be generated from so-called frozen Russian assets. Now, it is very obvious that Ukraine won't be able to pay back those billions of euro anywhere near in the future. Even if they stop the war or win the conflict completely right now, it will take decades for them to renew the country and not even to pay off the debt. In order to pay the debt, they will be forced to sell out a vast majority of Ukrainian assets, state companies, industry, natural resources, as well as their very fertile land. Sell it to the probably Western investors. Perhaps Western countries will annihilate the debt after several years, but the political price for Ukraine, I think it will be the same. But in either scenario, the Ukraine won't be very sovereign state for a long time. So now we can very clearly see who benefits from the current situation, current war in Ukraine, and who is harmed. The current conflict is certainly not in favor of common citizens, not in favor of Ukraine, but mostly in favor of those who are sitting in a safe distance and earning billions of dollars profits on weapons and energy crisis. Huge profits at our expense, at the expense of European citizens, and most importantly, at the expense of peace in Europe. And this is almost also the main reason why this conflict must be stopped, and it should be stopped on a platform, I would say, or in a city or in country which is respected by all countries, by all parties. So this is my point of view. I think that the war in Ukraine is not in interest of Slovakia, not in interest of Europe, even not in interest of Ukrainian citizens. It's mainly in interest of military industry, military complex, and many companies which are earning billions of dollars on energy crisis. Thank you very much for attention. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Спасибо большое.
Thank you. I would now like to ask the Baroness Cox of Queensberry. And the next speaker will be Mr. President of Republika Serbska, Milorad Dodik. Baroness, you're welcome.
Thank you for the great privilege of a very important symposium. It is a privilege. I'd like very briefly to introduce myself in case someone is wondering why someone with the strange title of Baroness is here today. All I say about myself is I'm actually a nurse and a social scientist by intention and a Baroness by astonishment. You become a Baroness by being appointed to the House of Lords in the British Parliament, and I was appointed there by Margaret Thatcher for having done a lot of work in fighting for freedom of speech. And so that is why I have my title. But today I hope to show a PowerPoint because I use my role in the House of Lords to try to be a voice for people whose voices are not heard. And we work, I visit places, and I like to be able to say I've been, I've seen, and this is how it really is. I've had the privilege of visiting Armenia and the little land of Nagorno-Karabakh many times since the war really broke out in the 1990s and has been on ever since. And next slide, please. If I can have the next slide. Armenia suffered the first major genocide of the last century when Western Armenia was annexed by Turkey. Nagorno-Karabakh is the little Armenian enclave relocated by Stalin in Azerbaijan, who attempted ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from that little enclave in a bitter war from 1990 to 94. And I was there many times during that war. Next slide, please. And more recently, I'm sorry to say, Azerbaijan has perpetrated more offensives against the Armenian civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh, the destruction of buildings of historic and cultural significance, and attacks on civilians, forcing a mass exodus. virtually all the civilians from Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenians, have had to flee with only the belongings they could carry with them. I was there when 150,000 of them had to flee from their historic homeland of Nagorno-Karabakh. Next slide, please. And just a couple of pictures. Azerbaijan has unleashed military offensives against the places inside Nagorno-Karabakh. 2 photos taken here when I was there before the mass exodus, damage to an electrical power station, and the virtual destruction of the maternity hospital in Stepanakert in Nagorno-Karabakh. And I could show you many pictures of such military offensives and destruction. Next slide, please. And Azerbaijani troops are seen here celebrating the capture of the town of Jabril. And there's a local bell tower of the local church, and they're celebrating its capture. And we do not know now how many churches have been attacked and maybe damaged or destroyed, because Azerbaijan is occupying the land of Nagorno-Karabakh now. Next slide, please. And after the 44-day war, as they say, that church was no longer there. That's all that is left of it. We do not know how many others have been destroyed like that. Next slide, please. One of the things we're very privileged to try to do, and we do this in our work of our small charity, Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, we try to help local people provide aid and advocacy in their own countries. And in Nagorno-Karabakh, we have a wonderful partner, Vardan Tadevosyan, who founded a rehabilitation center. Rehabilitation therapy is not very widespread in that part of the world, and it became well known as a very world-renowned rehabilitation center in Stepanakert in Karabakh. Last time I was there, I saw visitors from Japan visiting, and it is internationally renowned. But of course, that has had to close now with the evacuation of all the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. Next slide, please. And very briefly, there should be some more slides, but maybe they're not coming up. Do we have the second half of the slides? There should be a second half. If there isn't, not to worry. I can open up for questions and share my continuing concerns. But there are 2 halves of this PowerPoint, if there is another one. If not, I will stop talking about the slides and just say I'm deeply concerned, because what has happened since is the forced evacuation of virtually all the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. I was there when they were having to flee, and 140,000 had to flee from Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now if you can find the other half, it would be lovely. If not, there's not many more minutes left in my time that's scheduled, so I'm happy to continue discussion and take any question. But you could find them. I always say pictures speak louder than words. If it's possible to show the pictures, that would be wonderful. But just to say our continuing concerns, say virtually ethnic cleansing of all the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh, and it is now a land which is devoid of its historical Armenian population, and it is ethnic cleansing carrying on in our own day and cause of great concern. And I do try to speak about that because it is important that people know and people can try to seek some justice. But I will now be quiet. The other pictures come, that's wonderful. If not, I'm very happy to open up for any questions, contributions, or comments. Thank you so much for the privilege of sharing, I would say, the pain and the passion and the privilege of trying to make a little bit of a difference. Thank you so much. Am I talking too fast? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lady Cox. Огромное вам спасибо.
Thank you so much. It's too bad that the second group of slides didn't go through the internet, unfortunately. But at least everyone understood who is the new Mother Teresa of the 21st century. And indeed, the fighter for the unprivileged and their rights. And I said it the last time, and I will say it again, Baroness Cox, since the early 90s at least, perhaps before then, started visiting Nagorno-Karabakh to present the objective picture of what's going on there to the rest of the world. She is the patron angel for Armenians and for the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh and for the entire world. And all Armenians deify Baroness Cox. Thank you very much. Again. Now, I have the honor to ask to take the floor a distinguished President of Republika Srpska Bosnia and Herzegovina, His Excellency Milorad Dodik. Your Excellency.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this distinguished and important symposium. Thank you for allowing me to share my positions. I think that discussions of this type have been deficient so far. It was quite impossible to share one's honest opinion, casting a bit different light on the events in the world. The fact is that the world is in a disarray, and that a new multipolar world is being born, replacing what we have known so far as a unipolar world. The world is evidently regrouping, and what we are witnessing today are global conflicts, the one being currently waged in Ukraine. No one can no longer claim that this is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but it is a conflict between Russia and the West world. So the question is, why is it so? Because the Western world is being devoid of resources it needs for development. It's not unknown throughout history that the West has always been eager for Eastern resources, for what the vast space has. And many invasions we have seen in the history have been about that. So the current situation about the conflict in Ukraine itself is a result of this fervent aspiration of West to gather the resources. And it was done before through armed conflicts from Napoleon and some others. Today, it is done by undermining regimes, political systems, and countries and nations as such. And then it's an easy way to grab the resources. And this is what we are witnessing in Ukraine, not just now, but since 2014, when a revolution was introduced, a revolution, quote unquote, that changed the government at the time. And then the West tried to reassure everyone that they were treading on the right path, and that was just a starting point to grab the Russia. Today, we see that the EU does not have any evident resource, nothing of major significance. In Europe, there is no strong leader to be the head of the EU or to be the owner of the EU. The EU is experiencing a major crisis today. The stability it has enjoyed so far has been sacrificed due to unreasonable decisions of the EU to partake in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Today, we see that the EU is in problems that we could not even imagine 5 or 6 years ago, especially we who have been prepared before that to become a member of that important community. The question is, what has remained of the EU and the values it used to promote? Many things are at stake. For example, here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the EU seems to be giving up on what we used to know as the rule of law. Let me share with you an example. Here, there is an arrangement in Bosnia and Herzegovina called the Dayton Agreement. It stipulates that 1 year after the end of the war, meaning in 1995, a high representative should be introduced as an institute in a way where the signatories to the Annex 10 to the Dayton Agreement should select him or her. There are 5 of them: Serbia, the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Republic of Srpska, Croatia, and the Joint Level of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So they are the parties to select the high representatives. The Security Council of the United Nations was supposed to verify or confirm the high representative. None of the two has happened. The US administration, supported by the British and German administrations, obviously, simply introduced a foreigner, A. Schmidt, saying, this is the high representative now. Now he uses his decrees and decisions to amend laws, to impose laws. He is undermining the operation of the entire legal and constitutional system. And we are now witnessing a decadence and departure from what we used to know as the rule of law. And the European Union is being silent. Recently, he enacted a law stipulating that those who refuse to obey the decisions he would issue would be sent to prison for a period of 5 times. Right now, I'm being prosecuted right now because I allegedly do not adhere to the High Representative's decisions. I do not see that he has been selected by virtue of the Annex 10. I see him as someone who undermines democracy in disabling Bosnia-Herzegovina to operate as a country. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, there is a constitutional court. Out of 9 judges, 3 are foreigners: a German from Germany, a German from Switzerland, and an Albanian from Albania, together with the 2 Bosniaks, Muslims in Bosnia-Herzegovina. By majority, they issue all decisions of the court amending and changing the constitutional order, and they blindly obey the US embassy in doing so. This is just an example. The territories of the former Yugoslavia, as you may know, saw fierce intervention of the Western factor. It's quite difficult to say that it is the international community, and it was motivated by their selfish interests. On 2 occasions, the NATO alliance bombed the Serbian positions, once here in the Republic of Srpska in 1995, and again in 1999 in bombed Serbia. What we are seeing today as a consequence is the fact that children are now getting ill from malignant diseases because the NATO used depleted uranium bombs. And then when we say no to all of that, when we say something about that, then we get sanctioned by the US and the UK, and some European countries are trying to impose similar sanctions. So there is no justice for the small nations. It's evident. I mean, the big ones are arrogant, and we understand that. I mean, we can understand that, but we cannot stop fighting. So in this context, we should see the current situation. In 2007, I attended the Munich Security Conference, where Putin clearly described the position of Russia and what he expected as to how global relationships should evolve. No one wanted to hear him. The key question here, the key problem is that the elites in the US do not want to listen to or hear anyone. They just want to rule. They do not want to hear anyone. They do not want to understand the realities of the situation. The best examples are we here because they come here making decisions without listening to the people living here and always side with one party to the detriment of all others. So the sanctions imposed onto Russia were not supported and have not been supported by us. That's why we have been imposed 2 major sanctions at this point of time. The entire government of the Republic of Srpska has been sanctioned by the US because we did not allow Bosnia-Herzegovina to impose sanctions against Russia, because we do not think this is a war that we should partake in any way. On the other hand, we could never, ever have done it because this is Russia. And we have a friendly and brotherly attitude to Russia, have had throughout history. So it is evident that small nations, as we are, will significantly suffer when the big ones fight. And that we'll have to see what our positions will look like in the future without giving up on our positions. We are not going to introduce sanctions against Russia. We believe that Russia is entitled to defend its stance and its position. As we've heard from the previous speaker, it is known that the communist authorities in the Soviet Union, for example, gave Crimea, which is a significant portion of the Ukraine territory, to Ukraine, and then all of a sudden there is the West defending the communist arrangements. The same here. Communists drew borders that made no sense whatsoever, and then there comes the West in the 1990s defending the borders that are a communist makeup and are threatening with future conflicts. And I do not think that these conflicts will be resolved unless the parties agree. So the sanctions against Russia also harm the Western economy, and we see how it looks like and we see how it reflects onto this country because we do have cooperation with Western companies, and the orders are decreasing, which means that the volume of our production and output is decreasing. This only shows that the EU has accepted to be under the rule of the US, and that the major consequences and repercussions of this conflict will be a reshaping of the EU. The Brexit, the exiting of the UK from the EU was just a glimpse of the forthcoming crisis. We do not see clear positions any longer. This shows that the EU, without strong leaders, will continue to be managed by primarily the US. Many are right, and I subscribe to their point of view that the US is doing this to Europe to prevent any potential synergy or agreement between Europe and Russia, which will undoubtedly, in terms of Russian resources and values that Europe used to have, could be a new geopolitical reality that would not be to the liking of the US. And I think that's what we are seeing. The power of Russia, which has demonstrated that unprecedented sanctions resulted in its own production to make up for what it used to import. First of all, agricultural produce, meat, and other products. Russia is powerful and it can overcome the situation. I did have a meeting with President Putin. I have had it recently, and I see a wish to bring about peace, and that's the priority of the Russian Federation. But what I can also see is that there is no trust in the Western partners, those that scuttled the Minsk agreement, saying it was just nothing but bluffing. And the same is happening with the Dayton peace agreement. Now we have the so-called bond powers allegedly granting authority to the high authority to impose laws. That's just the bluffing. They are using brute force to maintain the practices they have had so far. I think that President Putin has more desire, wish, and aspiration to introduce peace than some other Western leaders. And I think that this situation will continue. In the meantime, we, small nations, should do our best to survive the conflict of the big ones. Thank you very much.
Спасибо вам огромное.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. President. We would like to subscribe under every word we heard from you. And one of the most important conclusions that you made is that it's hard to trust either Europe or the United States. We can't do that. And basically, it's the same handwriting we see everywhere. Baroness Cox spoke about Nagorno-Karabakh. Look at that. the Minsk group was created that was supposed to solve this problem. And the first point there was that absolutely no military solution can be used to resolve this conflict. And President Putin thinks the same about the Crimea and the Ukraine and the Minsk group. You remember who were part of the Minsk group, Angela Merkel and François Hollande. Again, the same was happening. When time comes for them to say the word, they are gone. And it's worth. By doing what they did, they were abetting, they were aiding and abetting the problem to exacerbate, and it stayed for the next generations. We are really sorry to see that the problem of the Republika Srpska is far from being resolved very soon, but we hope that our partners, the representatives of Slovakia, and a very important one of them is sitting next to me, members of the European Parliament, will be fighting for your issue to be resolved, and they will keep focus on that. And so your speech at this conference will have a good continuation, and I hope that we will continue our cooperation with you. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And now, thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jan Campbell from the Czech Republic. And I would like to ask Bishop Patrick Sugdeo to speak next after that. Mr. Campbell, the floor is yours. But please be brief, if possible. Good afternoon, dear friends. I will try to shorten my presentation, and if you want to learn more, you can get the presentation from your assistant. I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak at this symposium at the time when the politically correct way is not to talk about peace, but about war, about the strategic defeat of a nuclear state. That's being the narrative of the panicked society headed up by a great superpower that is in a systemic crisis in an anthropological war. I would like to emphasize that. Anthropological, not a traditional one. It's hard to talk about war or peace in a number of minutes and at a distance from a city which is very far from what can and could be called the city of peace. The last weekend saw a meeting of dozens of countries in Switzerland, Bürgenstock, meeting at a summit dedicated to war in Ukraine. It was not a summit on the peace, but it was a summit of war, although its goal, according to the organizers, was to create a map of the world that was supposed to be joined by other by fighters, one from Kiev and the other one from Moscow, without its willing. And the practical significance of the communique was much more modest than the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations of 2022 that criticizes the so-called Russian aggression, but the communique causes a number of questions that can only be answered by time. In any case, the current political elites are not going to answer that. So these are not the best times we're living in. The West is at fault in its defeat, and here's why.
Firstly, at some time, the US started to publish fake news about their GDP, artificially blowing up their numbers, and other Western countries follow suit. Second, the overall degradation of the education system is responsible for the industrial decline in America. That has been in place since 1965. This is why there's not enough people in the country with engineering degrees. Thirdly, not the Western world The non-Western world, that's now being called Global South, has all of a sudden, for the West, focus on Russia. Why? Because they don't, they're afraid of the West. This is one of the reasons why tens of countries did not send their top leaders to the recent meeting. The West were counting on playing the lead in the worldwide orchestra and forgot. So even before the summit, at the summit, and right after the summit, voices could be heard, like from Prime Minister of Italy, Meloni, von der Leyen from Germany, and the American leaders calling for war, including using nuclear weapons as a first strike, as the only way to save democracy and Atlantic civilizations led by the US. As to the summit in Switzerland, one can state that because of the fear of sanctions and other reasons, a lot of countries sent delegations of the lowest diplomatic level and, as it appears, did not even put their signatures on paper. Observers, as far as I know, didn't sign, as well as Ms. Kamala Harris, Olaf Scholz, and others who didn't wait until the end of the event and just left there after several hours. There are things more important than war and peace in Ukraine. Elections in the US and the UK, the crisis of the ruling coalition in Germany and other countries, everything pointing to the fact that these are not the best time for them. So what do they not remind us about? Firstly, none of the participants in the summit has publicly recalled the time when Nixon and Kissinger had serious problems with the communist world. None of the participants in the summit has publicly recalled that Americans are unable to order Israel to stop fighting and acting. As a result, it's not only the Muslim world that wants, that desires the victory of Russia. It's all because there are too many stupid things and irrational things in the behavior of the US. They're not reminding us that Russians want to conquer Kharkov and Odessa, not because they want them to become Russian cities, but because Americans have already turned them into an aircraft carrier on land. So, without further ado, I would like to say that Central Europe could become a central player. There are thinkable reasons why China feels confident and can position itself as a large broker. Russia may have refused the Chinese initiatives for tactical reasons, but since that time, it has several times thanked Beijing for their ideas and made a message that it would welcome further ideas. I guess that President Putin has made Chairman Xi understand that Russia will be agreeable to meet in China without visiting visiting Switzerland. So if Beijing manages to conclude directly or indirectly a ceasefire agreement, that could work wonders with the position of China worldwide. China will be welcomed all across the global south and will perhaps suffer less from the criticism from the US and its allies. Again, the ceasefire will not solve the question of the territorial dispute between Moscow and Kiev, reparations or responsibility for war crimes. Therefore, Western sanctions will continue. Russia will stay in partial dependency on China, and because no pause in action, the ceasefire will rule out the need of preventing further destruction of Europe. So these are not the best times. So what do we have to choose from? What options do we have? It's either West accepts Russian conditions or it denies the real situation, and we keep living in a vain hope for the victory of the Ukrainian troops. And because Russia is now faced with the question of whether to be or not to be, so Putin is not going to give up. At the same time, we'll see that we'll see politicians panic who can't accept the idea that Russia is not USSR. And because this is an anthropological war, the conflict will continue until the demise of Ukraine and will then spread to other battlefields. On Monday, American businessman, billionaire David Sachs, wrote in the X social network that Western delusions are dangerous for the world. The false agenda of Meloni stems from the false understanding of the reality that Russia will lose the war. They hold a war conference and call it a peace summit. Zelensky demands capitulation from Russia, calling it a peace formula. These delusions are dangerous for all the world, for the whole world. So these are the comments from this billionaire to Prime Minister Meloni's comments. I would, because time is flying fast, I would like to mention the options that are open for Putin. I think that President Putin now is the only rational leader who controls the nuclear situation, at least in some way. So using the opportunity given to me by the symposium, I am taking the liberty to use these conditions of as a way to prevent a total nuclear war. They're all disgusting, but nevertheless, they are much better than a total nuclear war that Prime Minister Meloni and high-ranking officials in Germany are talking about. The first nuclear explosions after the notification of the population of large European cities can happen at high altitudes. These explosions will damage all the electronics and other systems, and NATO would act in kind, but the actions of Russia will liven up the sentiments of the rank and file population, and NATO will be in panic. Or another solution, an atomic wave, or atomic bomb is useful in the role of the Gallic rooster. In this case, people will even better understand so there's an existential threat, and one needs to hear about that. And in this sense, I can only agree with Mr. Karaganov and other Russian patriots. And yet another option, notifying the Ukrainian citizens with a recommendation to move to a safe place because their homes and land on which they sit become unusable for population. As an example, you can cite what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu did. His example shows that the world did not respond to that. Russia can use this as well. Or option 4, wait until another time arrives and to start acting differently. Why? The former US President Donald Trump last Thursday called Putin a competitor rather than an enemy. He said, and I'm quoting, "I think we will do well with one another. But at the end of the day, he's a competitor. He represents Russia. I represent the US, the States. So in some sense, we are competitors. So it's not a question of being a friend or a foe. He is not an enemy to me. I'm hoping that someday he may even become a friend." So this is what Trump said. But what next? Even though many of you may think that this is not true. The results of the European Parliament elections can be regarded as the first sign of a change of tides in the political world in Europe. The elections in Germany and other countries indicates that large Europe is now in the condition of political stability. I entertain no illusions. The reality is such that the ruling powers now have all the capacity for dominating. And while the West is moving towards the inevitable end, one needs to get prepared to threats that border on threat of elimination. The European elections concern Americans, and this is why I expect that escalation will happen led by the US and Ukraine. The purpose of this escalation would be to provoke Russia for responsive actions and put Moscow in the position where they should face how far away they can go, because the Western elites do not fully believe all the warnings of Russia. So the above-mentioned actions can offer a Hollywood-based picture of the US victory, allow the time for moving the election of the US, and finally, a turn to the Taiwan situation. I'll have to wrap up here because I need to run. I apologize, but I think that you understood the essence of my presentation, and the organizers of this important event can pass a copy of this presentation to you if you wish. I wish all of you, your friends and colleagues, health and happiness, and success will follow. Thank you. Thank you. That was Jan Campbell, a well-known Czech economist, analyst, and publicist from the Czech Republic. And today we'll know that in the Czech Republic, Russophobia reigns so high that he is running a risk of getting a retaliation, but will be holding your back, Jan, as a mountain. Thank you. And now I'm passing the floor to the very Reverend Patrick. The Reverend Co-Episcopus Professor Dr. Patrick Tsukio.
Yes.
And I would like Jonathan Steele to prepare for to speak next. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My subject will be the quest for peace and stability in the Middle East and West Asia. For a number of years, I have been what is termed a deployable academic and cultural advisor for the British Armed Forces, as well as for NATO. I've been involved in 4 wars. The first is I was advisor in Afghanistan, around about from 2007 to 2010, but with involvement both before and after. In 1979, Brzezinski, the then National Security Advisor, put to President Carter plan to defeat the Soviet Union. Very simply, it was to lure the Soviets into Afghanistan, and then the US, UK, and her allies would then create what in effect would be an insurgency that would lead to the defeat of the Soviet Union, and so not just lead to her withdrawal, but ultimately to her collapse. May I say this totally in passing? I believe that that has been part of the strategy in Ukraine, to apply the same approach that was tested and tried in Afghanistan into the Ukraine situation. Of course, it succeeded. It led to considerable numbers of deaths. And when the US pulled out in 1989, they left behind a considerable conflict, in as much that there was still a functioning government, but there were insurgent forces, and more than 1 million died. That, of course, led ultimately to 9/11 and its consequences. But one of the consequences of that conflict in the 1980s was the creation of both Al-Qaeda and Taliban. In 2009, I wrote a paper for NATO in which I stated that my belief was that Taliban would defeat NATO forces. At that point in time, you had round about 325,000 Afghan forces, both military as well as police and others. A similar number of NATO forces, which was both green and blues. In other words, a combined force of about 700,000. The Taliban had 70,000, and my belief was that the 70,000 would defeat the 700,000. Of course, it didn't go down well. But I believe at the heart of it was the pure hatred for the West. Not just by the Pashtun, but even within the Afghan national forces. And I don't think the West realized, and that is principally the US, UK, and Europe, Australians, how much they were despised, how much they were seen as violent and barbarous and destructive. And that, of course, had led to the withdrawal 2 years ago and the consequences of that. The idea of any peace discussions at that point in time was not on the table. And in fact, I remember being in Brussels as one of the 4 Grade 1 advisors in Afghanistan, I lasted 15 minutes and walked out. Such was the hatred for Karzai. And even to this date, anything you read about Afghanistan is not steeped in any idea of peace, but rather of anger, hatred, to despise a people and to seek their destruction. I was involved, secondly, in Iraq throughout its conflicts in the Second Gulf War and for much later. Of course, we all know it was an illegal war that led to over 1 million casualties. In fact, the estimated children's casualties were around about 565,000 children. Madeleine Albright and other US officials argued it was necessary. The idea that the destruction of a whole country could be necessary, the mass killing of so many children and innocents. I served not just as the advisor in UK, but also on the ground in Basra, and I've had many visits to Iraq, both before, during the conflict, and after. And to this day, Iraq teeters on the brink. And of course, what we see with the development of Islamic State was the consequence of that invasion. For such was the hatred of the Americans and Europeans that the senior Iraqi military, who were being trained by NATO, effectively turned against the West and developed a new form of insurgency. The third war I've been involved with is Syria. I had met with President Assad. I was asked to be Kofi Annan's advisor as the UN sought to make peace with Syria, Mr. Obama. And one of the tasks I was given was to try to arrange a backdoor meeting between President Assad and President Obama. President Assad agreed. Geneva was agreed that Geneva would coordinate the whole effort, and it went to the State Department. The State Department response was a negative, in as much that President Assad was seen to be an evil man, with a mass murderer and killer, overseeing an evil regime, and there was no way in which President Obama and the State Department would become involved. The result was, of course, no peace, no discussion, an endless war that has seen the destruction of Syria. And I say Kofi Annan's resignation was interesting because he discussed with me why he resigned. And for me, he was, I believe, one of the greatest leaders in the 20th century, and a man whom I respected immensely. He said there are 2 parties to this conflict. On the one side, you have Russia and Iran. On the other side, you have the US and the UK. And he made a point to me, which I'll never forget. He said the US and UK must bear the primary responsibility for the conflict and its ongoing. When I discussed the matter personally with President Assad, he had hoped desperately in the very early days in 2014 that there would be a peace settlement, things would be sorted out, but he was rebuffed at every point. And now we are in a situation where a whole country is effectively being destroyed, and through sanctions and other policies. So if we see the destruction of Syria, what of Libya? I was senior advisor and consultant to NATO, particularly intelligence. And when the discussions on whether to go to war in Libya was being raised, I was involved with the fusion group. And as we assessed the information coming in, the conclusion was Colonel Gaddafi, his troops had not been involved in mass murder or mass rape. It was a lie that was put out by Hillary Clinton to try to use the principle of R2P, responsibility to protect, as a means of direct military intervention. By the way, the same argument was used in Yugoslavia some years earlier. The Security Council, of course, discussed it, and the position of Russia and China was interesting in what they laid out would not happen should they agree. Unfortunately, that was not acceded to. But let me step back. When the information came in, the analysts assessed it, and with the senior analyst and myself, we were deputed to give to the commander a letter that had to go to Sarkozy, to Cameron, and to Obama, which simply said, do not go to war. It's a lie. Unfortunately, we did go to war. The Security Council conditions were breached by those involved in the conflict. And a senior British general who came to have lunch with me gave me the reason. He said, putting it bluntly, Cameron and Sarkozy wanted to have their ratings increased, and they needed a war to do that. What we have then was another illegal war in which both Russia and China was betrayed, and we had the destruction of another society, another country. And why do I outline all of these? Because if we're going to address the quest for peace and stability, we must first look at history, because history tells us what has happened, what has gone wrong, what the issues are. And then from history, we draw the lessons for the present situation, the context. And as we do that, we can then see the future. What these wars have done in the Middle East was to produce a massive loss of trust for the US and for Europe. Now, I have lived most of my life in Europe. I regard myself as a European and proud to be a European. I've learned from its history and its traditions, all the excellent points that have shaped it for what it is. But may I say we must address its fundamental weaknesses over the past 20, 30 years, that in pursuit of power and dominance, we have seen the destruction of whole societies. So this loss of trust led to a massive reaction. And one of these reactions was to see the rise of religion and the development of a religion-based violent tradition. And this religious-based violent tradition that began to occur in 2007 posed significant threats both to the Middle Eastern countries as to the Europe and to the rest of the world. And my fear is, it's not terrorism, but this is not my subject, but insurgency. That the insurgent developments that we saw in the Middle East, particularly arising from the concept of the chaos of barbarism, of savagery, that would lead to the separation of whole communities and lead ultimately to mass violence. I think it's an issue which must be addressed, particularly the events of Gaza and Israel, what could potentially happen with Lebanon, Iran, and surrounding countries. So that was a second big consequence in terms of the development of religious-based violence. The third had to do with refugees, the crisis that resulted as mass movements of people fled the Middle East, whether they came from the east through Turkey or through the south, through Libya. And so Europe itself now faces existential problems. I do not want to use the word necessarily threats, but issues that will affect her very, very gravely. In the Middle East, and that's my final point, we have economic disparity, collapsing societies, the possibility of regional conflicts, and a total breakdown of what we see as potentially existing within the Middle East, with little or no desire for peace, because the Western parties are no longer trusted. Thus, the country which has emerged as the best at the moment is China, and it is China and Russia, which Middle Easterners now begin to look to as a potential way forward. Thank you.
Heilige Father, thank you very, very much. I'm totally impressed, really. Святой Отец 3 раза выступал в наших симпозиумах.
Father, you spoke 3 times at our symposium, and you sat here, and I was impressed by his speeches every time. But today, I really started to understand you. Too bad you couldn't be present this time in person, but I would like to thank you, really. And I think you wrote all of that in your books that we need to find and read. When I was in the parliament for the first time, to Lubers Plahok, the vice speaker, that I'm inviting Patrick Sagdeo, Reverend Patrick Sagdeo. He said, really, is he really coming? And I said, yes, he is coming, of course, because we find you very close to us. Here in Slovakia, they know you really well, and thank you so much. And now, I would like to give the floor to a very good friend of ours, member of the Club of Vienna, PANAP, a British journalist and publicist, former chief foreign correspondent of The Guardian, Jonathan Steele. And the next to speak would be Alexander Rar. Thank you. Yes, you, Mr. Rar.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to this important symposium. My subject is self-censorship, and my title, I've given this title to the talk, Self-Censorship in Ukraine, How Hard It Is to Talk About Peace. It is rightly said that the first casualty in war is truth. When fighting breaks out, propaganda, deception, and outright lies replace factual reporting and accurate analysis. In Russia, since February 2022, when President Putin launched his attack on Ukraine, it has been illegal in Russia even to say or write that Russia is at war. The law insists that the attack on Ukraine was the start of what they call a special military operation, and it must only be described as such. Any public criticism of it in Russia leads to prosecution, fines, or imprisonment. All independent media have closed, and hundreds of journalists have been driven into exile. In Ukraine, the Ukrainian government has also used administrative and judicial measures to control television and the media. In addition, there has been an extraordinary amount of self-censorship. What I want to do today is to concentrate on this latter phenomenon, especially on its widespread prevalence in the mainstream media of the European Union, as well as Britain and the United States. It's natural that the private sympathies of Western journalists should be with Ukraine as the victim of Russian aggression, but they ought to remain professionally impartial. Most reporters who cover the war from Kiev and Kharkiv or the front line seem to accept the taboos imposed by the Ukrainian authorities. As a result, they suppress important material which should be publicized but isn't. One blatant example is the failure to report on the extent of Ukrainian military casualties. The deaths of Ukrainian civilians are extensively covered and used as a stick to accuse Russia of war crimes. But no such attention is paid to the numbers of Ukrainian conscripts or volunteers who have lost their lives. With the aim of maintaining morale, governments throughout history have concealed their own army's losses. But this tendency has reached an extreme in the current war in Ukraine. No Western journalists have made a sustained effort to track the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers' deaths. Citing unnamed Western intelligence sources, they are happy to report on Russia's military deaths, even as they ignore what is happening on the Ukrainian side. Individual Ukrainian soldiers' deaths are sometimes reported by Western journalists on the front line, but they are invariably accompanied by upbeat interviews with surviving soldiers who say they will proudly carry on fighting and not give up. An interview with a soldier who says the war is too costly and not worth the losses which Ukraine is suffering is never shown. Self-censorship reached a new depth last year when the Ukrainian forces launched a counteroffensive with the aim of driving Russian forces back. Report after report in the Western media regularly claimed that the Ukrainians were advancing, although the evidence to justify these claims was woefully thin. Journalists shrank from suggesting that the counteroffensive might be failing. Only at the end of the year, when it could no longer be denied that the Ukrainian counteroffensive had made no progress on the battlefield, was the truth finally reported. Then the story was spun as a factor in the political struggle over getting Western governments to give more Western military aid to Ukraine. It was argued that the counteroffensive's failure showed the West should send more artillery, more tanks, and more ammunition to Ukraine. I want to come now to the biggest issue that has been suppressed by self-censorship in the Ukrainian and Western media. It concerns a significant policy option which flows from the failure of last year's counteroffensive. Rather than arming Ukraine for a new offensive, shouldn't the West and its media be calling for peace talks? Last week, President Putin offered a ceasefire and negotiations, but only on condition that Ukraine gives Russia sovereignty over Ukrainian territory, which Russian forces do not even occupy. This was clearly unacceptable. But the Russian proposal did at least offer Ukraine the basis for starting talks. This Russian opening should be pursued. Yet few reporters or analysts in Kiev and Western capitals, and almost no Western politician or heads of government dares to advocate peace. They fear they will be accused of playing into Putin's hands unless they insist that regardless of the huge loss of Ukrainian soldiers' lives and the massive material destruction involved in continuing the war, its goal must be complete Ukrainian victory and the defeat of Russia. This suppression of peace talk is not only damaging and dishonest, it is profoundly disrespectful of Ukrainian people's attitudes. A significant proportion of the country's people would like to end the war through negotiations. They realize that no amount of new military aid from the West will enable them to reconquer the Ukrainian territory illegally occupied by Russian forces since 2014. Ukraine does not have to accept a loss of sovereignty over the occupied territory under international law. If it agrees to a ceasefire along the existing front lines, as long as Russia also agrees to a halt in fighting, Ukraine will be following the precedent of the way war ended in Korea in 1953 and in Cyprus in 1974. In neither of those countries has there been a peace treaty. there has only been an armistice, but the guns have been silent for decades, and the killing and destruction have stopped. The authoritative Kiev International Institute of Sociology conducts regular polls of public opinion in Ukraine. In May 2022, 3 months after the start of Putin's invasion, the Institute found that 59% of Ukrainians wanted their government to engage in peace negotiations with Russia. Over the next few months, as Ukraine's leadership talked up preparations for a big counteroffensive, which would be launched in 2023, the Ukrainian public support for negotiations tailed off. It went down to 23% in January 2023. But as I've said, the counteroffensive failed, and the number of Ukrainians who want negotiations went back up to 42% in November 2023. There was a revealing nuance according to where the survey respondents lived. In the regions closest to the front lines, where people are most affected by the horrors of war, higher numbers than 42 wanted to see their government start peace talks. These important statistics show that millions of Ukrainians reject the official government line and the line of NATO that the war can only be ended by military means. The Institute's findings are, of course, rarely mentioned in Ukraine or the Western media. Self-censorship is the enemy of peace. Thank you for your attention.
Дорогой Jonathan.
Dear Jonathan, an outstanding presentation, very unbiased, and we value most it, considering your high rank in the British media. Guardian that you have been representing throughout your life. I am extremely thankful to you for this absolutely unbiased assessment. I think that tomorrow, when we are going to have a discussion, one of the most interesting topics will be about what we've heard from you about. Thanks a lot. And now I would like to ask our very good friend, a member of the Vienna Club Council, chairman of the Eurasian Society in Germany, from Berlin in Germany, Mr. Alexander R. Mr. Stefan Osenkop, please prepare to speak next. Okay, over to you, Alexander. Dear Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation. We've been convening at such a conference for 3 times. Can I speak Russian? Is the translation running? Yes, no problem. I just see that the moderator is praising each speaker. So I'm hoping I'm not going to be criticized too much. But I'll try to be very brief in the spirit of our discussion to share some ideas, even though the time is short. And generally, I'm asking myself what we should be discussing now in Europe. We see that Europe is at the position that diplomacy is war. And I'm very upset about that, because I see that this same Europe, just like the whole world community, is trying to do some peacekeeping in the Gaza Strip and stop the war there. But at the same time, they're also supporting the end of war activities in the Caucasus. They want Armenia and Azerbaijan to make peace. Same thing in other conflicts. But as far as the Ukrainian conflict, then no. Everybody's saying that the war should be led to the victorious end. And I don't know about your impression, but when I see all these politicians who we know how they all rush, like take Switzerland in the Alps, with all those smiles and patting each other on the shoulder and trying to get closer to Zelensky or Harris. What? They don't even understand what's happening in the world. I have a guess that they don't. This is my impression. So frankly, I don't even know what to speak about in Europe because nobody's listening to you. An opinion has been established and it's going to be pursued. If I'm allowed, I would like to talk about some contentious issues between Russia and the West, the way I see them. There are a lot of them. And I think the main question that we need to discuss at this conference is the future architecture of European security, because the war will finish one way or the other. Where are we going to live? What is Europe going to be like? It's clear that the West doesn't want to include Russia into this architecture. It wants to expel Russia to Asia forever. Russia requires for itself, as a great power, a zone of influence that would include Ukraine, Belarus, and the Caucasus. The EU, at the same time, wants to build its own superpower in the territory of Europe, the soft empire of liberal values. For the West, Russia, that does not subscribe to the liberal model of Western democracy, is an adversary and is now being called an enemy. That's also the essence of the conflicts. Whereas Russia, in its turn, cannot accept the enlargement of NATO all the way to the Russian borders because that conflicts with its national interests and will conflict with them even more looking forward. In the West, they believe that the Russian Empire has dissolved in 1991 forever. Nevertheless, Russia considers itself as a fully fledged successor of the Soviet Union, and it sees it making sense to restore its clout, its influence, first with diplomacy and now with military force. The West doesn't see the future of European security without the American nuclear umbrella, whereas for Russia, the wish is that things should happen on absolutely the contrary, with the impact of the US going down. Russia is prepared to individually collaborate with the leading countries of Europe, but it's still too far away from that. To Putin's suggestion that 4 East Ukrainian regions be given over to Russia, the West will never agree to that. Russia will never agree to the demands of the West to completely withdraw its troops from Ukraine and the Crimea in the first place. Nevertheless, the peace talks will start, and I think it will happen with the initiative of China. I think it can happen at the end of this year or in the beginning of the next year. As to the fully fledged war between NATO and Russia, I don't think it'll go as far as that. Well, some speakers here have scared us with it, but I think it's about an apocalypse. It's the end of the world, and I'm hoping that it'll never get to that. Why? Firstly, because Americans don't want that, the other great power, or the main great power of the world, they don't want it. And without America, other European powers will not go for a direct confrontation with the Russian army. Macron wouldn't either, even though the EU doesn't want to lose Ukraine under any circumstances, because that would strengthen Russia as a great power. So I think sooner or later, a compromise, a trade-off will be achieved. Those Ukrainian territories that Russia considers as its part and where the Russian army is today will go to Moscow. The Crimea will be recognized as part of Russia, and Ukraine will be compensated by the West by some membership in the EU, but not in NATO. The West can soften sanctions against Russia if Moscow agrees to take part in the economic recovery of Ukraine. As we see, the US and the EU are desperately fighting for the conservation of the old unipolar world. Russia, China, and other BRIC countries have seriously started building a multipolar world. And this multipolar world will unfortunately be built through confrontation rather than diplomacy. The peaceful phase of humankind development, as we've seen it after World War II and after the end of the Cold War, is unfortunately over. The globalization that everybody was dreaming about, and in the first place we in the West, has failed. And not in the least because of the Western sanctions against all of its adversaries and enemies. The world will see a split into different blocks, at least two, if not more. The West will keep relying on the global strength of the United Nations, the American dollar, and the NATO military power. We'll see soon how NATO will extend its presence in Southeast Asia and will be pressurizing China, just like it is pressuring Russia in the European continent. Russia will find itself in the epicenter of the new Eurasian security architecture, which in its turn will kind of balance Europe and pro-American countries in Asia. I think this is the picture that we're going to see. And the only question is, whom will the Global South join? This is also a part of our symposium, Middle East. Which powerful force will emerge in Africa and the Middle East? This could be a militant Islamist, but one can't rule out a serious competition between China, Russia, and the US for this region. The conflict about who is in control of these important regions from which the West will get the important resources will only grow. Geoeconomy will become more important than geopolitics. The discussion of security issues in Europe will start in serious when it'll become clearer how the Ukrainian conflict is going to end. The West is still hoping that Ukraine is going to win. Should it happen, Russia will fully lose its great power status. But if Russia wins, that will be a severe blow to NATO and EU and serious conversations will start in the West, whether to go back to the Cold War, to put everything to counter Russia. And a new arms race will start, if it hasn't yet started, which will lead to serious questions of security. So the alternative, I think, will be in looking for touch points with Russia about in the issues of security. And I think that we can still entertain hopes for the next meeting between presidents of Russia, China, and maybe the US. And so maybe we could hope for that, and maybe even in this city of peace, Bratislava. Thank you for your attention. Well, so that you shouldn't call me subservient, I shouldn't praise Alexander Ra's presentation, but on the other hand, how can I help doing that? A German facing such a risk, I don't know how he's going to come back, especially if I introduce the next speaker, Stefan Ossenhoff. And here I'm reading that he's a blogger and a person writing and making comments in different media. So he has listened to Mr. Ra, and Mr. Ra, I think, is going to follow the steps of Mr. Kamalov. What was the name of that guy who was stopped in Komleva? Mrs. Komleva. Thank you. So you know, she was detained at the border last evening. Austrian police took her and has not let her into the country. A professor, a doctor of science, a genius of a woman. We had to skip her presentation today, and perhaps we'll pass some resolution after that to help her. But she spent the whole night in the police station in Vienna for no known reason. Lubica, do we have any news about her? No, we don't. Not yet. Okay, we'll see. We're working on that. All right. Stefan Ossehot, you're welcome. Senior researcher at Schiller Institution. Schiller, what kind of Schiller? Is it a politician? Joking, of course. Sasha is saying his opponent. I had known. The International Not-for-Profit Commercial Analyst Center, also an independent author and blogger, and also a consultant and a mass media commentator. Yeah, welcome, Mr. Osenkopf.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard. My sound coming through okay? Thank you very much, Excellencies. Thank you, Chairman. Dear friends, thank you for the invitation. I feel really honored. My focus is the greater geopolitical landscape, but also the Middle East. And the question is peace through development possible? The situation in the Middle East has once again become the center of international attention as a result of the events of the recent months we're all following. South Africa's evidence before the International Court of Justice in The Hague has convinced the judges that the intention of genocide, by parts at least of the Israeli leadership, against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is probable. Since then, there has been an international movement denouncing these war crimes. At the same time, tensions between Israel and some Arab states, or states that sympathize with the Palestinian cause, are increasing. The measures taken by the Republic of Yemen, Turkey's economic boycott against Israel, Iran's drone and missile attacks or retaliation, and the clashes with Hezbollah and Israel are just examples of this. The entire region could go up in flames. Despite increasingly critical public opinion, the United States has only issued admonitions, but no consequences, such as an arms embargo. Israel invokes its right to self-defense and the experience of the Holocaust as justification, whereas the opposing side, on the other hand, points to decades of oppression, expulsion, and the disproportionate brutality with which civilian populations in the Gaza Strip are being killed. The United Nations has strongly condemned Israel for its blockade of humanitarian goods such as food, water, and fuel. The International Criminal Court is already investigating Hamas and the Israeli side. The situation seems so deadlocked that there is no way out in sight. What force could ever change the situation in the region for the better? Almost 35 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the international situation is complex, conflict-ridden, and chaotic on the one hand, while on the other hand, there is a new paradigm of international relations and global governance. A new financial system and a new security and development order are being worked on. One of the epicenters of this debate was the recent three-day summit in St. Petersburg, the so-called St. Petersburg Economic Forum, International Economic Forum. More than 20,000 experts, politicians, specialists discussed a fairer, multipolar order in which wars are fought neither for so-called values nor for civilizational supremacy. This new order, which has been given a face above all by the rise of the BRICS states, has become the engine or the transmission belt for the majority of the world's population to finally realize the interests of developing and emerging countries, of former colonies, of non-aligned states, etc. The wars that have brought us endless suffering today and in recent decades, and have even brought us now to the brink of nuclear conflict between NATO and Russia, are manifestations of hegemonic endeavors that emanated from London and Washington after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Brussels and many European countries played a submissive role and just followed suit. But now we are in a situation in which the collective West must understand that neither conventional military force nor sanctions will achieve its goal of securing a unipolar world order in the long term. On the contrary, the sanctions have become a boomerang for European countries, especially Germany, where I'm speaking from. Western munitions production is only a fraction of what Russia can currently supply. The recent showdown in the Swiss town of Bergenstock with the expired president of Ukraine does not increase the West's control. On the contrary, the heads of state of the G7 countries are increasingly hated even in their own nations, as the latest results of the European elections have shown. NATO has not even halfway digested its loss of face from the defeat in Afghanistan and is now threatened with total embarrassment in Ukraine. And in the Middle East, Washington's most important ally, Israel, is not only suffering global reputational damage and also economic damages, but is also failing to achieve its main military objectives and freeing the hostages. Negotiated solutions must be found in both Ukraine and the Gaza Strip, unless NATO goes completely mad and provokes a nuclear Armageddon. In this context, there is a very important proposal from the internationally active think tank, a network of experts, the Schiller Institute, which I am happy to represent today. They not only connect peace activists worldwide so that they can coordinate their actions, they have also been able to show through their research, in the case of protracted conflicts and wars, justice cannot be achieved by offsetting the misdeeds of the other side, but by introducing a principle of natural law, coupled with the prospect of economic development, in which the mutual benefits of cooperation are worked out. One historical example is, for example, in the negotiations during the 30 Years' War in Europe that almost wiped out all life from Europe between 1618 and 1648. Then the principle of a nation's sovereignty was made the subject of diplomatic endeavor in the Peace of Westphalia. A nation that defined itself by common cultural traditions, a common language, common ways of thinking, had the right not to have other nations interfere in its internal affairs. In return, however, it also was not allowed to interfere in the affairs of other nations. In diplomacy, the principle of mutual advantage was introduced, something we today call the win-win cooperation. Negotiations always had to take into account the demands and interests of the other side and make concessions in a compromise. Because both sides have an advantage in the end, there is no sense of a zero-sum game in which one side wins and the other goes away empty-handed. The second point is that it was only through the principles of the Peace of Westphalia that important economic and scientific achievements became possible in peacetime. France and Germany in particular became globally recognized centers of science. It is impossible to imagine the modern world without these principles. They became part of the United Nations Charter after the devastating First and Second World Wars, were also reflected in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence of the Indo-Chinese Treaty 70 years ago, the so-called Panchil. They have found their way into the founding charter of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and are the living core of relations between BRICS states. Now here comes my point, the crux of the matter, I think. The West has lost its principles. It neither recognizes the security and development interests of its supposed adversary, nor is it prepared to make any concessions, as the aforementioned Ukraine Peace Conference, so-called, in Switzerland, and the recent statements by the foreign ministers and heads of state of the G7 have made abundantly clear. Their so-called rules-based order no longer has anything to do with the principles of the Peace of Westphalia and the UN Charter. They violate a core principle, that of forbidden interference in internal affairs, which manifests itself above all in NATO's eastward expansion, in the various color revolutions, in the arming of terrorist organizations, and in coups d'etats. The West must now and finally put an end to its deception. But we cannot rely on this in the short term. That is why I believe that the responsibility and the key to peace and development, both in the greater Middle East region and in Africa, as well as in Ukraine, lies with the countries that are building a multipolar order based on 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Signs of this are the Chinese 12-point plan and the Chinese-Brazilian 6-point declaration on settling the war in Ukraine, as well as the call for an immediate peace conference on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. The core of BRICS cooperation is collaboration in the areas of trade, of infrastructure, industrialization, and science. The influx to the BRICS is so great because this is the overwhelming interest of the majority of humanity. Poverty, injustice, and ignorance are the breeding ground for conflict. This is why the BRICS states have supported the new Silk Road initiative from the outset. Infrastructure corridors, pipelines, data cables, manufacturing centers, scientific cooperation, industry, from mining to space travel. This is also the key to bringing peace to the Middle East through development. An offer should be made to the various stakeholders, countries, and factions in the region. Not only should a peace conference be convened, that goes without saying, but it should be accompanied by a major economic symposium that brings together all those involved, including investors, companies, scientific organizations, experts, in order to jointly draw up a development plan for the region that serves as a parallel transmission belt, so to speak, so that the negotiations, the political negotiations, can and will come to a conclusion and are not broken off again, as was the case during the Oslo Accords, due to discord and bitterness. Approaches for such an overall plan have been around for some time. For example, experts from the Schiller Institute have developed the so-called OASIS plan, which envisages a comprehensive modernization of the region. Before the construction of roads, railways, and harbors begins, the plan envisages a more fundamental step, the construction of water desalination plants and artificial canals. The energy for water desalination is supplied by small modular nuclear reactors that could be operated for several years without water cooling, even in the middle of the desert or the steppe. In a crash program, these reactors could be mass-produced and installed on-site by the combined production power of the BRICS countries. The newly created, just 2 minutes, sorry for the delay. The newly created freshwater resources could be used immediately for large-scale desert greening and agriculture. Of course, the city would also be rebuilt, but under completely new circumstances. There's no reason why the region should not look as developed as Europe. The interest in this project would be so great that it would also extend to the countries of the Sahara region, Arabian Peninsula, Iran, India, and many others. This would also be very important for the West to see this region flourish. So if you need more information on the OASIS plan, I would be happy to provide you with materials. Why shouldn't top leaders in the BRICS countries and like-minded European countries and organizations put this OASIS plan into action, just as the middle corridor of the Silk Road, the international north-south transport corridor, a dozen of other major projects that are already being implemented. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for your interest.
Спасибо, спасибо огромное.
Thank you so much, Herr Osenkopf. And we'll be listening through your presentation again later on. We'll try to take into account and implement some of your ideas through our club. And now, let me introduce the next speaker. She will be the last one before the break. Ms. Isabel Kassel, a journalist and researcher in such international crisis areas as the Middle East, the Balkan states, and South America. The search for peace and stability in the greater Middle East. Please.
Thank you very much. I hope you're still up for another contribution before the break. So let me start and try to be brief. I am an European, ironically, tragically, living in Germany. Ironically, because I grew up in a country with a special history and have internalized the principle of never again war. Tragically, because all of these lessons from history seem to have been forgotten. And I am defamed in my own country if I defend these principles now. I identify myself as a European because I have Austrian-Hungarian ancestors on my mother's side and French ancestors on my father's side. I have always supported the idea of European integration, but I see Europe as a continent of 40 countries, including Russia, and the hope for the promise of peace, prosperity, social justice, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion. However, the technocratic EU apparatus is currently almost exclusively about monetary values, the free movement of services, goods, capital, and labor. Above all, the promise of democracy and peace is not being fulfilled. Although the majority of people in the EU countries and the USA are in favor of negotiations, the promise of never again war and democracy as the cornerstone of a united Europe seems to be broken when the majority opinion is not determining the direction of politics in this case. Never again means never again standing by and watch injustice, expulsion, and genocide, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, or religious affiliation. This means that anyone who looks the other way and does nothing, or even supports the right-wing extremist government in Israel by supplying weapons, as the German government is doing, is complicit. The German government is not acting in our name when it justifies the completely disproportionate Israeli violence as legitimate self-defense, verbally calls for the protection of innocent people, but actually supports and politically flanks this excess of violence with arms supplies. The terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023, cost the lives of 685 Israeli civilians, 373 members of the security forces, and 71 foreigners. This is condemnable, but it is no justification for Israel's imposition of collective punishment on Gaza. As with 9/11, when we condemned the US war on terror, the appropriate and constitutional response to a terrorist attack is simply the targeted arrest of the attackers with police operations for the purpose of their conviction in a court of law. Even the killing with drones, which is often practiced, is murder, and therefore a crime in itself if you combine prosecutor, judge, and executioner in one, and at the same time murder numerous innocent civilian victims as collateral damage. In addition, resistance to occupation is just as legitimate under international law as the right of self-defense. Hamas attacks on the Israeli military are covered by this, whereas attacks on civilians are always crimes. The International Court of Justice in The Hague has accepted the genocide complaint against Israel and thus confirmed an initial suspicion that the state of Israel is guilty of this serious crime in Gaza. The death toll is over 37,000. 70% of them are women and children. 87,000 wounded, 1.9 million internally displaced persons. The cities have been reduced to uninhabitable wastelands. In the course of the Israeli government's war of extermination against the Palestinians, 1 million people are suffering from severe hunger, which is deliberately used as a means of warfare. 3,000 children have already starved to death. The unceasing bombing of civilians, even in refugee camps defined as safe zones, the denial of water, food, medicine, and fuel to the imprisoned population makes life unbearable. The long list of war crimes committed by the IDF on a daily basis includes the torture of detained men under general suspicion. The countless racist and fascist language used by Israeli ministers and generals is aimed at the destruction of the Palestinian nation and the final expulsion that began in 1948 with the Nakba. All parties to the Genocide Convention are obliged to take measures to prevent genocide. Now let's see what Germany is doing. Germany is the second largest arms exporter to Israel with 47%, only just behind the USA with 51%. By increasing arms deliveries to Israel almost tenfold since October 7th, 2023, the German government is actively contributing to the continuation of the war with countless victims. The German government has therefore rightly been sued by Nicaragua for aiding genocide at the International Court of Justice. At the same time, the so-called German raison d'etat, Staatsräson, which is not legally fixed, prevents the important open discourse among the population, the majority of whom reject the government's cause, and is another expression of US affiliation and dependence. 2017, the German government fatally decided to use the expanded working definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for anti-Semitism. Since then, criticism of the State of Israel, understood as a Jewish collective, has also been considered as anti-Semitism. This definition blurs the necessary distinction between hostility towards Jews on the one hand and legitimate and necessary criticism of the actions of the right-wing Israeli government on the other. Just how problematic the blurring of hostility towards Jews and criticism of the Israeli government is, especially in Germany, can be seen in absurd and shameful cases in which non-Jewish Germans accuse Jewish Israelis who are critical of their government of being anti-Semites, or in cases where Palestinians are denied participation in demonstrations against racism and remigration and become victims of racist hostility themselves. In order to avoid such aberrations, we advocate using the more precise definition of the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism of March 26, 2021, instead of the IHRA definition, which contradicts common usage. Because of the inflationary, false, instrumentalized accusation of anti-Semitism when rightfully criticizing Israel's actions, the freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of education and science is increasingly restricted. You will certainly have heard about the ban of the Palestine Congress and the entry and activity bans on well-known international speakers. Demonstrations in Berlin have also been banned and protest camps violently broken up. It is a shame that these supposed Democrats, who rightly condemned deportation plots by right-wing extremist Germans, at the same time stand unwaveringly by the side of a right-wing extremist Israeli government that is carrying out real deportations, expulsions, and genocide in Gaza. It is also completely ignored that both the Palestinians and the majority of other refugees would prefer not to flee at all, but to live in their home countries in safety from NATO interventions or from wars that Germany supports with weapons. This is how the so-called German raison d'etat, Staatsräson in particular, practically leads to the betrayal of human rights and international law and the continued loss of credibility. International cooperation is needed to put pressure on Germany to stop supplying weapons to war zones, above all to Israel and Ukraine. The only German party calling for this is the new BSW, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. Fortunately, there is support from left-wing Israeli civil society, as young people in Israel recently chained themselves to the entrance of the German embassy in Tel Aviv to protest against German arms shipments. What we need is a loud pan-European voice calling for a ceasefire and sustainable political solution. This can only consist of an end to the occupation and land theft in the West Bank, an end to the blockade of the Gaza Strip, and the granting of equal rights to all people living between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. Otherwise, the war is likely to escalate into a regional war. Hezbollah is following their United Front doctrine. They are fighting to support the Palestinians, but are prepared to stop fighting as soon as Israel stops attacking the Gaza Strip. It is similar with the Houthi blockade of the Gulf of Aden. Israel, on the other hand, wants to push Hezbollah armed forces at least back behind the Litani River, but would have to invade up until Beirut to achieve this forcefully. Instead, the agreement of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 must be respected, which already demands the withdrawal from Hezbollah as well as from Israel to stop violating Lebanon's airspace, territory, and territorial waters. Since its foundation, Israel has tried to create facts, ignoring international law and UN resolutions, and has gotten away with it. It is an urgent question as to how the Israeli government can be persuaded to change its policy if its human rights and international law violations remain without consequences by allied states due to the double standards of Western governments. These double standards are also very visible in Syria. Due to the sanctions and unilateral punitive measures imposed by the West, there is a lack of everything needed to rebuild the country destroyed by the proxy war. Syria's oil fields, wheat and cotton growing areas in the north and northeast are occupied by Turkey and the USA. The Golan Heights were even annexed by Israel after a long occupation without any reaction from the so-called values upholding West. A sustainable peace solution in the Middle East therefore must include an end to the occupation of the Palestine, Syrian, and Lebanese territories by Israel, Turkey, and the USA as occupying powers. Just have to put my line, and the echo is running low, sorry. Israel's right to exist, which is internationally recognized, goes hand in hand with the right to exist of a sovereign, self-determined and viable state of Palestine, in accordance with the UN petition plan. In order to be able to conduct serious negotiations for just peace, the recognition of an independent state of Palestine within the borders of 67, with East Jerusalem as its capital, by all European states, is required in order to underline the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Germany, the EU, and the USA must stop supplying Israel with arms immediately. The Israel-EU Association Agreement, which commits both partners to respecting human rights, should be suspended until Israel implements the UN resolutions. Of course, it also needs an immediate release of all the hostages, as well as the Palestinian prisoners. Today, the Israeli state is holding well over 10,000 Palestinians captive, including many minors, in violation of international law and the law of war. The right to return for Palestinian refugees to their homeland must be granted as well. The Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 is a good basis of agreement with firm goals, also leading to a peace agreement between the Arab nations and Israel that would guarantee security for all states in the region. There must not be a further conflict management, continuing the occupation. That would only mean investing in future tension and more wars. All sides must recognize enemies as human beings. So I hope, wish you a well break now.
Спасибо большое за ваше очень интересное
Thank you
представление.
for your very interesting presentation of the region that concerns all of us. Well, frankly speaking, when I was comparing the victims in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, after that, and when I'm hearing those frightening numbers from the Palestine, 37,000, 70,000 kids and women. one doesn't even know what to do. You meet to get together with pan-European forces and to pursue this, but unfortunately it doesn't help. As I said in my presentation, there was the group, Minsk group for Karabakh, and now look at what's happening in Ukraine. How many years has the Minsk group spent working there? What I mentioned in my speech is about the rules that the West has devised, the Anglo-Saxons have devised. And these rules needs to be gotten rid of, going back to the international law. That's what Russia supports, China is supporting, BRICS countries are supporting, and perhaps what we see now in the actions of Russia's President Vladimir Putin. On the one hand, it terrifies the West. I mean, his visit to North Korea and Vietnam, one might think that it is that the war can't go away, that in the near future, a large-scale war can be expected. But on the other hand, and I apologize for that, it can, what can happen can be quite the opposite. If the West finally comes to understand that nobody is joking with them anymore, maybe they will cool down and with their cold minds dwell on these things, and maybe a solution can be found for some time, but it won't happen for quite some time, I think. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about the Middle East, and we'll be discussing your speech once again. Now, we have a break until 3 p.m. and then a very, very important presentation from Mr. President Igor Dodon about the participation of the Republic of Moldova in the sanctions war with Russia, how it has entailed an economic crisis in Moldova. A very exciting presentation. So thank you very much. We'll be waiting for that. And I wish you a good lunch. Thank you.